So, little bit of an overview of the Be Well programme on the first slide here, really focusing in on that second paragraph. As you all know, the Be Well survey is the first of its kind across the city region. What you may not know is that in 2021, 37,713 pupils in 142 secondary schools completed the Be Well survey. So the main thing that I think me and the rest of the Be Well team have to say to you all at this point is thank you. It's been great for you to do that work. We wouldn't have all of this data if it wasn't for all of you. What's also great to hear is that since we shared the reports with you earlier in the week, we know that 110 schools have accessed their dashboard already, and we've also got ever increasing numbers of people booking in to do one-to-one sessions to unpick their data a bit further. So that's great, and thanks to all of you. So in terms of your dashboard, as I said, the Be Well Data Hive, which you should have received your login details for. If you haven't, then do contact us. And it was very much designed with support from those of you who were part of that out there in the school community, particularly with school leaders, to really focus in on the things that school feel important. If you haven't received your dashboard yet, then the person to contact is Lawrence. If you drop the name of your school in the chat now, then Lawrence should be able to pick that up for you and see what's happened there. Okay, so it focuses on the domains and drivers that are priorities for schools. It's a big report, and we really focus in on the things that school told us were important for them. And what we're able to do within it is put some signposting in there of schools that we're talking about them as statistical neighbours. I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. So you can compare with similar schools and see how you compare with them and how your students compare. We've used a combination of data tables and also data visualizations that we are aimed to be as intuitive as possible. I'm going to give an overview of those today. And then really you can drill down at different levels of what we would call granularity to really understand what this means for the population of your school. So thinking about different groups of boys, girls, and children who are eligible for preschool meals, all of those kind of things are in there for you to be able to dig deeper. And we've also added in, based on feedback, a feature that you can compare side by side different groups. Wasn't in the original version, is in the most up-to-date version based on feedback from all of you. So thanks for your feedback, it's been really helpful. Okay, so accessing your report, assuming that you've been sent your login details, and if you haven't, you need to contact Lawrence. The website's there, it's all online. Your login and password will have been sent to the Be Well contacts that we had on the 31st of January, so on Monday. If you haven't had it, get in touch and we will sort it out as soon as possible. A little note to think about whenever we're considering data. It's a starting point, and it's a starting point for discussions about the needs of your school population. It will help you identify areas for development and improvement, but also to consider the areas of strength that are there within your pupil population. So really helping students to reflect on their positive qualities. It does provide you with a kind of additional independent evidence about your pupils, but always when considering data, you know a lot about the young people in your school too, and this should complement that and be seen as additional to that and to give you a broader understanding of the children and young people in your school. So when you go into the report, you enter on the main school page, which looks like this, with the Be Well School Data Hive at the top. A couple of things to point out for you here. The main sections, which are highlighted there, that's where all of your data sits. They're the bits that we will expect that you spend most of your time in there. It's where you can dig down to the domains and drivers. It's where, as I'll show you in a bit, you can use filters to understand how groups are doing. So most of it is in those main sections identified there. There are also some appendices that give a bit more background information, so do have a look at those. And particularly if questions are raised about, for example, what were the questions that we asked in for this domain, for this driver. All of that's in there within the appendices, and funnel plots, which is something we'll come to in a moment. There's a really detailed guide to how to use funnel plots further on. The header that you can see at the top, you will see across various pages within the report. First of all, it should have the name of your school at the top. If it doesn't, that's a red flag. Let us know. It shouldn't. It will have your school name. But there's also, you can use the printer icon to print as a PDF. But the I wanted to draw your attention to particularly, there's additional guidance at various points through the report. So if you're a bit stuck or you're not quite sure what something means, look for that green I and it will give more information to you. So the first of the main areas that I'm going to draw your attention to is the summary page. And what the summary page does is, against the domains and drivers, it gives a RAG rating. So red, amber, green rating. The red, pink, is if we think that the responses from your young people suggest this is something that a bit more concerning than we've seen in other schools that have surveyed. If it's green, then it seems from the data that in this particular area, things seem to be better on average for the children and young people in your school. And if it's amber, the yellowy colour you can see in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, then that means that children and young people in your school on average responded in a similar way to children and young people across Greater Manchester. So that's the RAG rating. It's very much an at a glance summary of how things are. It does introduce you to the filtering system that we use. So you can see at the top, and there's some drop downs, and they're reasonably self-explanatory, and you'll see them throughout the report. So you can filter by year group. In your schools, year 8 and year 10 this year completed the survey. So you can look at all pupils, or you can just look at year 8, or you can just look at year 10. Gender, you have the choice of all or female and male. That's the gender as reported through the local authority data, so it's the same as within your school census. Free school meals, which it can be all, or it can be eligible for free school meals or not eligible for free school meals. The data that we collected there was ever 6 data, so anyone who's been eligible for free school meals within the last 6 years. And SEN is all children who are identified as having a special educational needs, not necessarily an education, health and care plan, but eligible that identified special educational needs and non-SEN. Slight caveat there, that data is as accurate as your school census data was when you last submitted it prior to the survey period, which was probably in the summer term. So if things don't quite match with some of the numbers for your current population, it may be that there have been some changes in your data since it was shared with us. So you'll see those filters as we go through the report. They work in the same way as we go through. Little note there about higher and lower and better and worse. The questionnaires, the survey uses questionnaires that have been developed by various developers over the years, and they have various scoring systems that sit behind them. On some scoring systems, a high score is better. On some scoring systems, a higher score means higher levels of difficulties, which is a little bit confusing when we're using the higher and lower terminology, but to make it as easy as possible for you at a glance to see what's happening. If it's red, that means it's worse. If it's green, that means it's better at its most straightforward. So you may sometimes see things starting with higher. Higher stress is a bad thing. Higher life satisfaction is a good thing. So use those colours to help. You'll also, within that summary page, you might see some grey boxes. The grey boxes appear for a couple of different reasons. As you all know, it's an anonymous survey, so we need to protect the anonymity of participants. That means if there are fewer than 10 in any category, we don't put a RAG rating there. Now, that isn't true in most cases when you're looking across your whole school, but when you start to filter, particularly if you've got multiple filters, so if you're looking at boys with SEN who are eligible for free school meals in year 8, you soon narrow that down to a small group, and you may start to see more grey boxes appearing, and it's the same data suppression that operates throughout the report. There is also within that summary report some of the areas, because of the way the data has been collected, we don't do a RAG rating for. It's not included in the dashboard, but you can understand how that data works in different areas that I'm going to come to in a few minutes. So that's what the grey boxes mean. So each box should either be pinkish red, an amber, green, or if it's grey, there are a couple of reasons why it's grey. There's an explanation in the box too, but it's useful to just draw your attention to that. Okay, so the real meat, I think the meat of the dashboard is in the domains and drivers of well-being section. So within there, all of the domains and drivers of well-being are there as a drop-down menu. So you can select, you can see them at the side, and these are the things that children and young people across Greater Manchester said were important for their mental health and well-being. So lots of different things there. If you're interested in the questions that sat behind some of these domains and drivers, in one of the appendices, you can actually have a look at what the questions are to understand them a bit more. I would recommend doing that for some of them. I think it's helpful. And when you choose a domain or a driver, then that data is then presented to you in one of a couple of ways. So you might see a stacked bar. They're a reasonably familiar presentation of data. You can see them on the left-hand side. I'm going to come to those in a moment. And then you might also see a funnel plot, which is what you can see in the middle. Again, I'm going to explain a bit more about funnel plots in a moment. So they're the main types of visual representation that are in there, but you can also see the data. You can see in the bottom right hand corner of that funnel plot. You can also see the data in a chart, so you can see the averages, you can see the numbers as well. So you've got the combination of the chart and the visual representation. Whichever visual representation is used, there is the same kind of filtering that I talked about on the preceding slides. So you can have a look at these different representations within the domains and drivers for boys, girls, eligible for free school meals, identified as special educational needs. All of those filters are there. So you can have a look and see how different groups compare and how different groups are doing. So that's at a quite high level. I'm now going to move on and talk a little bit about some of the comparators that you will see within there. So within the domains and drivers, you can see both in the charts and also in the visual representations, not only the results, the findings for your school, but you can also see two different comparator groups that you can compare with. So one of them is the all schools. It's labelled all schools, I think, on the stacked bars, and Be Well schools on the funnel plot. And that is what it says on the tin. That is a comparison with all the young people across Greater Manchester who took part in the Be Well survey in 2021. And the comparable schools is a smaller group of schools, and what that is it's the 20 participating schools. So obviously we're only working with the participating Be Well schools that are most similar to yours in terms of deprivation, ethnic diversity, and size of school. So there's a formula that sits behind that, which if you're interested in, we can go into. But using those different metrics, we identified the 20 schools that were most similar to yours. So that's a subgroup of that broader school of the all Be Well schools. When we look at the different representations, you'll see how that comparator data is used, but it's just useful to check in what we mean in terms of those different comparators. So the stacked bars, reasonably familiar way of presenting data. They show the percentages, the proportions of respondents that responded in a particular way, and then there's one bar for your school, and then there are two other bars for the two comparators that we've talked about already. And so that's the all Be Well schools, or comparable schools, the similar schools. You can filter them in exactly the same way as we've talked about previously. If you filter them, then the comparator group is filtered as well. So if you filter for boys, then you'll be comparing with boys in other schools, boys in your comparator schools and boys across Greater Manchester. Worth pointing out at this point that if you are in a single-sex school, we would suggest that you have the appropriate filter on all the time as you're working through, because we do know that there are differences between how boys and girls respond to surveys of this kind and in terms of levels of need for boys and girls. So if you are in a girls' school, then we would suggest you have the filter on for girls, and then you'll be getting a truer comparison of how the girls in your school compared to girls in your comparator schools and across Greater Manchester. So something to note there specifically for single-sex schools. And that's true all the way through, obviously, not just for the staff class. The other representation, which is possibly one that's less familiar to schools, is the funnel plots, which I will be honest, when I first saw a funnel plot, I kind of thought, I don't understand this. And then actually very quickly was like, this makes a lot of sense. So do bear with it and have a look, and it soon becomes reasonably intuitive. But what they do is they plot the across the x-axis, across the horizontal axis at the bottom, is the number of survey respondents, and then up the side we have the average score for the measure. So far so straightforward. So within your school, a certain number of people will have responded. That would take us across the x-axis, and there will be an average score for children and young people in your school. So that takes us up the y-axis. So that's where the spot comes in. So you can see with the middle label, your school, that's the spot for the school on the test report that I was using. So that's where the position of that is brought in. You will see it's surrounded by lots and lots and lots of other spots. So the blue spots are all the other schools across Greater Manchester. Again, plotted in just the same way. So number of respondents and then the average score. And then the grey ones are a subset of that, which are those comparator schools that we talked about earlier. So those 20 that are most similar to your school in terms of deprivation, FSM, etc., as discussed. So you can see how those spots are plotted. So each dot is a school. When we're working with data, we can see that, you know, at its most obvious, you could be above average or below average. And the line for the average score is the grey line across the middle. What you can then see sitting around that grey line is an orange funnel. And the orange funnel represents the confidence intervals for the sample sizes. So if we're working with a bigger sample, there is a higher chance that we could, well, no, I'm going to say it the other way around. If you're working with a smaller chance, there is a higher likelihood that the responses and the distribution was down to chance, was random. But the bigger the sample size, the more confident we can be in the accuracy of the data. So as we go across from left to right, those confidence intervals narrow, and so that tells you how likely it is that, it tells you how the likelihood that it is occurred not due to chance. What you're really looking for is that if you fall within the orange section, and that means that you're broadly in line with the average, and we have no reason to think that it's not average. If it falls into the green, that means that in this particular domain or driver, that children and young people in your school have scored better, doing better in that particular area. And if it's in the red, that means things are worse. So you need to find yourself on that chart and see how you compare to other schools. Aware that this might be an unfamiliar way of presenting data, and there's a much more detailed guide to funnel plots included in your dashboard. Moving on. The comparison section, so again, of the main sections within the report, there's one called comparisons. What you can do in there is, rather than just looking at the single chart and applying the filters, what you can do is look at two different charts side by side. So for example, you could look at boys versus girls. You could look at year 8 against year 10. You could look at SEN against non-FSN. You can also filter a little bit more than that. So I think you could filter gender and age groups. So you can refine it a little bit more. But that's just a way of being able to see pretty much at a glance how those two groups compare. So it might be funnel plot. It's for the funnel plot, you can see them and see that. Fine, coming towards the end of the main bits of the report, there's also a section that says overall report on all measures. So what this does, if you go into this section, it pulls together all of the funnel plots, the stacked bars, the summary report into one place. So it's all there with an introduction. You can see on the slide in front of you what's included in there. So if you just want to see everything in one place, then that's the purpose of this particular section. What you can still do is filter, so you can have an overall report, but you could have an overall report for girls, or you could have an overall report for year 8 or an overall report for year 10, but that pulls all of the information into one place. So rather than exploring and going into the different domains and drivers, it puts it all in a single report for you.